You have a running list of things to do. You also have a second list of things you meant to do yesterday. Your phone carries 17 unread threads, two of which feel urgent and one of which you have been avoiding for a week. You sit down to focus, and within 4 minutes, you are somewhere else entirely. Not because you chose to be, but because the mind just went. This is most days. The response to this condition has become its own industry. There are systems for capturing tasks, systems for batching them, systems for deciding which quadrant they belong to, and apps that lock you out of other apps. People who use these tools are not lazy or undisciplined. They build the systems carefully, run them for a few weeks, and then watch the familiar scatter return, usually accompanied by the added weight of now also having a failed system on their hands. The frustration is real, but the diagnosis underneath it is wrong. The assumption built into every productivity system is that a scattered mind is a scheduling problem, that the right arrangement of tasks, the right time blocks, the right review cycle will bring the mind to heal. Each new system is a more elaborate version of the same intervention. Rearrange the furniture. Hope the room feels different. When it does not, the conclusion drawn is personal failure rather than a failed premise. Vedanta draws a different conclusion. A scattered mind is a predictable outcome of a specific kind of overload, one that no calendar or app can touch, because the overload is in the mind itself. Every productivity system starts one step too late. It assumes the mind is ready to be organized and lacks only the right method. Your mind at any given moment is not just tracking your current task. It is holding the mortgage payment due next week, the conversation yesterday that did not land well, the subscription you keep meaning to cancel, the family obligation you agreed to before you thought it through, the career pivot you are half considering, the appliance that needs servicing. Each of these sits in the background consuming mental RAM, available processing capacity. By the time you sit down to focus, you have already spent most of it. Yoga means acquiring what you do not yet have. Kshema means preserving what you have already acquired. Together, they describe a loop that never closes. You get the job, then you must keep the job. You buy the house, then you must maintain the house. Every acquisition opens a new maintenance account, and there is no natural stopping point, because every solution generates its next problem. The more you acquire and commit to, the more Yoga-kshema expands, and the more mental bandwidth it consumes. A mind running this process at near full capacity has almost nothing left for sustained, deliberate thought. Calling it scattered is generous, it is occupied. Bahushaka means many-branched. It describes an intellect so dissipated by competing goals and conflicting priorities that it cannot hold a single direction. When the intellect tries to serve all of them at once without hierarchy, the result is paralysis wearing the mask of busyness. Picture a businessman standing in his office, a phone pressed to each ear, conducting 2 calls at once while also trying to speak to someone standing in front of him. No single conversation gets his full attention. Each one suffers. And yet he feels productive because he is managing 3 things. The productivity app makes a quiet promise. Add this system to what you are already doing and gain clarity. This is the same as throwing a drowning man a better swimming technique manual. The water is still the water. The mind is operating far beyond its sustainable load. What feels like a focus problem is a bandwidth problem. A bandwidth problem cannot be solved by adding software. It can only be solved by reducing the load. Vedanta says you cannot focus your way out of overload. You have to reduce the load itself. This sounds obvious until you see how actively most people resist it. The instinct, when the mind feels scattered, is to add something, a new app, a new routine, a new morning ritual. But every new possession you acquire brings new obligations to maintain it, new relationships built around it, and new transactions required to sustain it. Pull one leg of a table and the other 3 move. No system running on top of that structure will undo it. The 4 categories through which mental bandwidth drains are possessions, obligations, relationships, and transactions. Every item in each category is a running process in the mind. The house you own is a continuous set of concerns about maintenance, value, insurance, and future plans. When every channel of attention is occupied, there is nothing left for focus, for reflection, or for anything requiring sustained thought. The mind is scattered because it has been fully booked. The Prime Minister's sickness makes the same point from the other direction. The Prime Minister has more transactions, more meetings, and more obligations than almost anyone. And yet, the moment the Prime Minister falls critically ill, every program is canceled without a second thought. Not postponed, canceled. Transactions are possible only when the underlying entity is functional. When the mind is sick with agitation and overload, the first responsibility is to cancel programs until the underlying instrument can breathe again. Port reduction is not a moral argument for simplicity, an instruction to abandon your life, or a vow of poverty. Port reduction is a technical requirement. You have one mind with finite capacity. Every possession, obligation, relationship, and transaction above the necessary threshold actively consumes the bandwidth that focus requires. Reducing the load is the prerequisite for any genuine mental function. The practical question is where to draw the line. Vedanta's answer is a shift in orientation, from behaving as an owner to functioning as a trustee. The owner carries the full psychological weight of acquisition and maintenance, the relentless Yoga-kshema cycle that never closes. The trustee fulfills genuine responsibilities without internalizing the anxiety of perpetual preservation. This does not mean handing your affairs over to someone else. It means handing the burden of it, the preoccupation, the clinging, the compulsive mental rehearsal of what could go wrong, to an order larger than your own management capacity. The external load may not change immediately, but the mental grip on that load can. Once that grip loosens, room becomes available. The room a single prioritized direction needs to take hold. Clearing external load is necessary, but not sufficient. A mind freed from half its obligations will not automatically settle. Left without direction, it will find new things to orbit. This is where the internal work begins, and it requires understanding something precise about how the mind moves. Sit down to work on one thing. Within 90 seconds, the mind has drifted to an email you forgot to send, which reminds you of a conversation from yesterday, which pulls up a worry about next month. You chose none of these. The mind swung from one to the next on the thinnest thread of association. The way a man gathering fruit high in a tree does not climb down to reach the next tree, but uses his own body weight to bend the branch until he can grab the adjacent one, swinging forward without ever touching the ground. This is the mind doing what it does when it has no clear instruction. Wander. Vichara is the fluttering, outward movement of the mind toward whatever catches its attention next. It is the mind's default state. When there is no single direction held firmly in place, Vichara fills the gap. The antidote has a name, samathanam, the deliberate focusing of the intellect on one thing at a time. The Sanskrit root points towards settling, placing, establishing. Samathanam is the act of giving the mind one track and keeping it there, consciously, for a sustained length of time. This is what Siddha Ekagrata means, the one-pointedness of the inner instrument. When you attempt to do three things at once, you do not have three intellects running in parallel. You have one intellect, one buddhi, fragmenting itself across three demands at once. The result is one intellect made to feel like it is failing at everything. The confusion is built into the attempt itself. Bahushaka is what the intellect looks like after years of this. Countless pursuits, countless priorities, each pulling in a different direction, none receiving enough of the mind to actually move. An intellect in this state does not need more tasks organized into a cleaner system. It needs to be given one branch to hold, and then actually hold it. Samadhanam is that discipline. One priority, held clearly, long enough to think it through. A river with defined banks does not slow down. It deepens and moves with force. The same water spread across a field becomes a shallow, directionless flood. Samadhanam is the banks. The mind resists this, not out of laziness, but out of habit. Years of multitasking and constant stimulation have trained it to treat sustained attention as discomfort. The moment one thought is held for more than a few seconds, another arrives at the edge with an urgent claim on attention. Recognizing that arrival as a habit, not as a signal that the other thing genuinely requires attention right now, is the first move of samadhanam in practice. When your attention moves away from the task in front of you, do you experience it as a choice Or does the mind simply arrive somewhere else? What does that tell you about who is directing the mind? A common response to learning about samadhanam is to sit down, close the eyes, and try to force the mind into stillness. The problem is not too much thinking. The problem is the direction of thinking. Outward, associative, endlessly chasing the objects and transactions of the world. A mind forced into blankness has not found focus. It has been held underwater momentarily. When the pressure releases, it surfaces exactly where it was, still scattered, now also frustrated. Samadhanam is the reorientation of the field in which thought moves. Here the deeper practice enters, nididhyasanam, the deliberate dwelling on one's higher nature, the sustained turning of attention from the frantic individual self toward the witness beneath it. When you notice your mind has wandered during a work session, the instinct is to clamp down harder, to exercise more control as the doer, the manager, the stressed professional who needs to produce results. This is the ahankara, the sense of individual doership, doubling down on itself. It generates more friction, not less. Nididhyasana moves in the opposite direction. Instead of the ahankara tightening its grip, the inquiry loosens it. Who is watching the mind wander? Who is aware of the distraction? That awareness is already present, already still. This dwelling cannot be manufactured by sitting and repeating a question. Conviction must precede practice. Mananam, sustained analysis and questioning, builds that conviction. You ask, you examine, you work through the argument until you are genuinely persuaded that you are not the scattered mind, but the witness of it. Only then does nididhyasanam have real purchase. Without that intellectual foundation, sitting in meditation to gain conviction is, as the teaching states, meaningless. The cart goes before the horse and goes nowhere. Think of a ball placed on a staircase. Left alone, it does not stay on any step. It falls omosazan, one step, yahimem, then another, gaining speed with each drop. The mind without directed practice behaves the same way. Pramada psidashin. The habitual negligence of one's true nature is a series of small defaults, each one making the next slightly easier, until the mind is back in the same patterns it started with, transacting, acquiring, worrying, wandering. The ball does not fight gravity. The mind does not fight its habits. Without a conscious counter-movement, the steady practice of dwelling on the witness, the descent is automatic. Nididhyasanam is that counter-movement. It is the quiet, repeated return of attention to what is already the case, that beneath the noise of obligations, plans, self-criticism, and distraction, there is an awareness that has never once been scattered. The ahankara presents this as threatening, as though dropping the role of frantic manager means the whole operation falls apart. What falls apart is the exhausting belief that the frantic manager is who you are. What remains is functional engagement with life, minus the identity crisis that surrounded it. Two objections arise with such regularity they carry nearly the weight of universal responses. The first, I have a job, a family, financial obligations, and I cannot reduce my life. The second, if my mind is the problem, should I not just force it to stop thinking? Both rest on a misunderstanding of what the solution asks. Every new possession arrives with a shadow, new obligations to maintain it, new relationships formed around it, new transactions generated by it. Pull one leg of a table and the other three shift. You do not have to dismantle your current life to experience relief. You have to stop expanding it. The immediate practical move is a freeze. No new possessions, obligations, relationships, or transactions beyond what genuine necessity requires. This alone begins to reduce the pressure. The deeper move is a shift in role. From owner to trustee, the owner carries the full weight of preservation. Everything must be acquired, maintained, protected, grown. The anxiety of Yoga-kshema, the exhausting loop of getting and keeping, is the owner's permanent condition. A trustee manages the same assets with a different relationship to them. The maintenance anxiety is handed upward, to a larger order than the individual ego can control. This reduces the felt urgency of every transaction. Things still get done. The mind stops treating every task as an existential emergency. The responsibilities remain. The frantic ownership of those responsibilities does not. The mind's nature is movement, not a flaw but a function. A mind that cannot move cannot process, plan, or respond. Trying to arrest its activity by force is a misapplication of the entire teaching. What has been scattered across 1,000 directions needs a single, prioritized direction. The mind is redirected. This is why pramada, the tendency to forget one's higher orientation and slide back into old patterns, is treated as the real danger, not thinking itself. A ball dropped on a staircase does not need someone to smash it. It needs a landing. Without a clear internal direction, the mind will roll downward toward viparita bhavana, the habitual pull toward old identifications, toward the familiar noise of acquisition and transaction. The solution is to give the mind something real to rest on. The confusion comes from mistaking stillness for blankness. Stillness is a mind moving in one direction, deeply. Blankness is a mind going nowhere. A different kind of scatter. Samadhanam is the former. It requires a prioritized object, not an empty field. When you imagine simplifying your life, what arises first? Relief or resistance? What does the nature of that response tell you about how tightly you are holding your current load? You reduce the fuel load that generates excess thought through port reduction and replace directionless wandering with a single, deliberate orientation. The mind that was burning itself across 100 channels now has one channel. It can move. Port reduction frees up bandwidth. Samadhanam gives the mind a single direction. Nididhyasanam reorients it from the individual ego towards something steadier. But these are all operations performed on the mind, by the mind, for the mind. There is a deeper resolution, one that does not manage the scattering, but dissolves your identification with it entirely. The scattered mind is real. The overload is real. But you know your mind is scattered. You can observe the jumping, the unfinished thoughts, the pull in 6 directions at once. The moment you observe the mind's chaos, you are not inside the chaos. You are watching it. The one who watches is not the one who wanders. Vedanta states a fundamental law plainly. The observer is different from the observed. If you can perceive your anxiety, you cannot be that anxiety. This is the witness, not a separate self floating above the body, not a mystical state achieved in meditation, but the simple, already present fact that awareness illumines every mental event without being altered by any of them. Your mind has been frantic for years. Your awareness of that frenzy has remained unchanged. The screen does not become agitated when a storm plays on it. Most people trying to fix a scattered mind are operating from inside the storm, using the scattered mind to organize the scattered mind. This is why every productivity system eventually fails. It is the wave trying to smooth itself out. The wave cannot do that. But the water, which is what the wave is, was never disturbed. The scattering and the overload belong to the mind as instrument. They do not belong to you as the witness illumining that instrument. Port reduction and samadhanam remain necessary, because an overloaded instrument cannot easily be seen through. When you are standing in the middle of a traffic jam, it is difficult to remember you are not the traffic. The external simplification and the internal reorientation create the conditions in which this recognition becomes available. The recognition itself is not another technique. It is the understanding that the one who has been searching for focus was never unfocused. Only the instrument it was looking through was. The wind brings clouds together, and those clouds produce rain. The wind is not troubled by the rain it causes. Your vasanas, your deep-seated habits of thought, bring mental storms together, and those storms produce disturbance. The witness that illumines this entire sequence, including the storms, including the vasanas, including the awareness of vasanas, remains untouched. As one teacher states directly, I am not the mind, nor the owner of the mind. What becomes possible from here is not a life without mental activity. The mind will continue to move. That is its nature. Thoughts will arise, shars. Obligations will make their demands. The world will push. But the quality of your relationship to all of it changes when you are no longer identified as the one who is failing to manage it. You can engage fully, work precisely, respond to what is in front of you. And when the session ends, You return to the stillness that was there throughout. Not because you cultivated the stillness, but because you recognize that you are it. That awareness, is it scattered or is it present? No system fixes a scattered mind because the mind was never the problem to be solved. It was an instrument to be understood, simplified, reoriented, and finally seen through. What remains when you see through it is the one thing you have been looking for in every focus technique and every calendar block. A peace that does not depend on the mind being quiet because it was never produced by the mind in the first place.